Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Janavallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Srila Prabhupada ki, Sutra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the Simul devotee. All glories to the Simul devotees. All glories to the Simul devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continued readings from Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, Chapter 23, the Shishumar Planetary System, and we're hearing today text 3. Oops. Does someone have a... maybe someone can read the verse? I just have to pull something up on my
translation. Translation. When bulls are yoked together and tied to a central post to thresh rice, they tread around the pivot, without deviating from their proper positions. One bull being closest to the post, another in the middle, and third on the outside. Similarly, all the planets and all the hundreds and thousands of stars revolve around the pole star, the planet of Maharaj Dhruva, in their respective orbits, some higher and some lower. Fastened by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to the machine of material nature, according to the results of their fruitive acts, they are driven around the pole star by the wind and will continue to be so until the end of creation. This planet floats in the air within the vast sky, just as clouds with hundreds of tons of water float in the air, or as the great Senia eagles, due to the results of past activities, fly high in the sky and have no chance of falling to the ground.
According to the descriptions of this verse, the hundreds and thousands of stars and the great planets such as the Sun, the Moon, the Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter are not clustered together because of the law of gravity or any similar idea of the modern scientists. These planets and stars are all servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda or Krishna, and according to his order, they sit in their chariots and travel in their respective orbits. The orbits in which they move are compared to machines given by material nature to the operating deities of the stars and planets who carry out the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by revolving around Dhruvaloka, which is occupied by the great devotee Maharaj Dhruva. This is confirmed in Brahma Samhita 552. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, under whose control even the sun, which is considered to be the eye of the Lord, rotates within the fixed orbit of the eternal time. The sun is the king of all planetary systems and has unlimited potency in heat and light. This verse from Brahma Samhita confirms that even the largest and most powerful planet, the sun, rotates within a fixed orbit, or Kala Chakra, in obedience to the order of the Supreme Personality of God. This has nothing to do with gravity or any other imaginary laws created by the material scientist. Material scientists want to avoid the ruling government of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore they imagine different conditions under which they suppose the planets move. The only condition, however, is the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All the various predominating deities of the planets are persons, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also a person. The Supreme Personality orders the subordinate persons, the demigods of various names, to carry out His supreme will. This fact is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9:10, wherein Krishna says, "This material nature is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, and it is producing all moving and unmoving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again."
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. I can pick up from here. The orbits of the planets resemble the bodies in which all living entities are seated because they are both machines controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridesher arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutanam yantra rudhani mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The machine given by material nature, whether the machine of the body or the machine of the orbit or Kala Chakra, works according to the orders given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and material nature work together to maintain this great universe. Not only this universe, but also the millions of other universes beyond this one. The question of how the planets and stars are floating is also answered in this verse. It is not because of the laws of gravity. Rather, the planets and stars are enabled to float by manipulations of the air. It is due to such manipulations that big heavy clouds float and big eagles fly in the sky. Modern airplanes like the 747 jet aircraft work in a similar way. By controlling the air, they float high in the sky, resisting the tendency to fall to earth. Such adjustments of the air are all made possible by the cooperation of the principles of Purusha, male, and Prakriti, female. By cooperation of material nature, which is considered to be Prakriti, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is considered the Purusha, all the affairs of the universe are going on nicely in their proper order. Prakriti, material nature, is also described in the Brahma Samhita as follows. Shrishti sthiti pralaya sadhana shaktir eka chayeva yasya bhuvanani vibharta durga ichanu rupamapi yasya chachestaseya govindamari purusham tamaham bhajami. The external potency, Maya, who is of the nature of the shadow of the Chit, spiritual potency, is worshipped by all people as Durga, the creating, preserving, and destroying agency of this material world. I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, in whose accordance with whose will Durga conducts herself. Material nature, the external energy of the Supreme Lord, is also known as Durga, or the female energy that protects the great fort of this universe. The word Durga also means fort. This universe is just like a great fort in which all the conditioned souls are kept, and they cannot leave it unless they are liberated by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord Himself declares in Bhagavad Gita, Janma karma charme divyam evam yo veti tattataha taktateham punardhanma naiti mameti sorjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Thus, simply by Krishna consciousness, by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can be liberated, or in other words, one can be released from the great fort of this universe and go outside it to the spiritual world. Almost done. A few more paragraphs. It is also significant that the predominating deities of even the greatest planets have been offered their exalted posts because of the very valuable pious activities they performed in previous births. This is indicated herein by the words karma nirmita gataya. For example, as we have previously discussed, the moon is called Jiva, which means that he is a living entity like us, but because of his pious activities, he has been appointed to his post as the moon god. Similarly, all the demigods are living entities who have been appointed to their valuable posts as the masters of the moon, the earth, Venus, and so on, because of their great service and pious acts. Only the predominating deity of the sun, Surya Narayan, is an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Maharaj Dhruva, the predominating deity of Dhruva Loka, is also a living entity. Thus there are two kinds of entities, the Supreme Entity, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the ordinary living entity, the Jiva. Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. All the demigods are engaged in the service of the Lord, and only by such an arrangement are the affairs of the universe going on. Regarding the great eagles mentioned in this verse, it is understood that there are eagles so big that they can prey on big elephants. They fly so high they can travel from one planet to another. They start flying in one planet and land in another, and while in flight they lay eggs that hatch into other birds while falling through the air. In Sanskrit, such eagles are called shrina. Under the present circumstances, of course, we cannot see such huge birds, but at least we know of eagles that can capture monkeys and then throw them down and kill and eat them. Similarly, it is understood that there are gigantic birds that can carry off elephants, kill them, and eat them. The two examples of the eagle and the cloud are sufficient to prove that flying and floating can be made possible through adjustments of the air. The planets, in a similar way, are floating because material nature adjusts the air according to the orders of the Supreme Lord. It could be said that these adjustments constitute the law of gravity, but in any case, one must accept that these laws are made by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The so-called scientists have no control over them. The scientists can falsely, improperly declare that there is no God, but this is not a fact. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapatantikam Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanan Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation repeated. When bulls are yoked together and tied to a central post to thresh rice, they tread around that pivot without deviating from their proper positions, one bull being closest to the post, another in the middle, and a third on the outside. Similarly, all the planets and all the hundreds and thousands of stars revolve around the pole star, the planet of Maharaj Dhruva, in their respective orbits, some higher and some lower. Fastened by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to the machine of material nature according to the results of their fruitive acts, they are driven around the pole star by wind and will continue to do so until the end of creation. These planets float in the air within the vast sky, just as clouds with hundreds of tons of water float in the air, whereas the great Sneha eagles, due to results of past activities, fly high in the sky and have no chance of falling to the ground. So, this is quite a lengthy verse and purport, but we're continuing description, understanding the nature of this universe in relation to Krishna, that actually all of the celestial bodies are simply moving by the supreme will of the Lord. And Prabhupada is emphasizing here, we could say, perhaps part of his mood and mission, if you will. But we're hearing very clearly, actually, Prabhupada is debunking the theories of scientists. So I want to discuss a little bit about that point, and there's a lot of nice points here in the purport. But Prabhupada begins actually by explaining the nature of these planets, that they're floating in the space, but it's not actually by the law of gravity. He explains quite clearly this has nothing to do with gravity or any other imaginary laws created by the material scientists. So this is a pretty bold statement. We might be hesitant to perhaps read this in the astronomy lab or the physics classroom today because of so much faith that is given to these material So how can we understand that the law of gravity is imaginary? Well, I'm not a scientist, but I was just doing a little research just to refresh my memory that Newton put forward this theory. It's related to the theory of relativity, that between two objects there's a relative principle of attraction. And it doesn't necessarily operate on very small atomic particles, but when it comes to the great planets and masses in the solar system, it acts very profoundly. So their theory is that all the planets are in their positions because of this principle of gravity. Similarly, if you drop an item on this planet due to the relative masses, it's a gravitational field. So this is very widely accepted. It's considered a law. Many of the modern scientific theories are considered this is a law. So just to understand Prabhupada's point that this has nothing to do with gravity, or even going so far to say that's an imaginary law, I found a few nice statements by Srila Prabhupada. He explains, why experiment? Things are already there. The sun's energy is already there. What else is there to know? So many apples fall from trees. What further need is there to explain the law of gravity? Actually, the scientists are lacking in common sense. They are simply concerned with scientific explanations. They say the law of gravity works only under certain conditions, but who has made these conditions? When Krishna appeared as Lord Ramachandra, he threw stones on the water and the stones floated. The law of gravity did not work in that case. Therefore, the law of gravity works only under the direction of the Supreme Lord. The law in itself is not final. A king may give a law, but he can change that law immediately. The ultimate lawgiver is Krishna, and the law will only work by his will. Scientists tried to explain God's will in so many ways, but because they are conditioned by Maya illusion, they can only talk like a person haunted by ghosts. So the idea is that the so-called law of gravity, or many of the modern scientific laws, it's simply a name given to some sort of observable phenomenon. But Prabhupada's indicating here that, okay, this is the law, that they're investing so much consciousness in mathematical equations, but actually that law is not absolute. The laws concocted by materialists are never absolute, because the platform what they're using is material speculation, or their mental capacity. So in one sense it seems very strong to say this is imaginary law, but in the ultimate issue, actually, because it's not absolute, it can be changed at any time. It's not actually like a real law. From Prabhupada's point of view, coming from a Vedic spiritual understanding, the so-called relative laws, they're changing every decade. That's not a real law. It's simply an observation. There's a nice conversation also between Prabhupada and a few of his disciples. Amogha, but if we tell that there is no law of gravity, they will say that, why is it that if you throw up a ball, then it comes down? Prabhupada, it comes down heavy, then it comes down, that's all. But that heaviness, they say, is gravity. Prabhupada, you can call anything, but if Krishna desires, a football may not fall. Just like so many planets, they are carried up by the air. All these planets are moving only by the air. So the heavy land, heavy cloud is carried by the air. It is a question of adjustment of air, not the law of gravity. Now the whole universal planetary system are floating and rotating around the pole star. It is law of gravity. They are rotating. It is the arrangement of the air. By the air it is up. Just like there is dust storms, so many are floating in the air. There is no question of law of gravity. It is the air. And who is controlling the air? That is Supreme Personality. Just like in Darwin, the motor buses were floating by the air. It was a great storm there. Yes, hurricane. On Christmas Day, motor buses were floating, and this is the law of gravity. So, as we're hearing the description of the Srimad Bhagavatam, these planets, it's not simply by this principle of attraction, but rather, I found a very unique image. I was unable to, I don't have it projected or anything, but what they call space-time is a means to project certain relative motions in regards to the planets or outer space. So they had a picture of the Earth, if you can imagine the Earth here, and then a grid, like a grid. Now what happens is the Earth is right there, but the grid, it actually comes down to a vortex right below the Earth. So in other words, that any phenomenon coming within close to that field of the Earth will be affected, and what it's showing actually is by the airs, that actually there's a change in the electric field around a large, astral body like that, and therefore anything coming in touch, but the medium by which that's being affected is through air, actually. Just like here we're hearing some buses are there. Of course, the so-called law of gravity should act, they should fall, but actually they're being suspended by the air. Also we're hearing in the purport, just like the 747, it's so heavy, but by manipulation of air. So the continued aspect of this was that yes, Kanandar says, okay, so Prabhupada's continuing. The law of Kanandar says that, well, the law of gravitation is always working. The energy is always there, it's just not enough. Prabhupada, working under condition. Just like you take a little needle, it will go immediately down in the water, and if you give a big log, it will not go. The weight of the needle and the weight of the log, much different. Still, the needle will go, gravitation will work, but to the log, it will not work. Kandar, well, there's a counter law called buoyancy. Prabhupada, anyway, there are so many laws. If this law is fulfilled, then your so-called gravitation works. So who made the laws? That is the point. Under a certain law condition, it will act. Under a certain condition, it will act. So who made the condition? That is the question. So the idea is that there's certainly a phenomenon going on, but it's not in absolute sense. There's counter laws, buoyancy, and all these other things that scientists will project to explain, try to justify this phenomenon of the gravitational law. But again, it's not absolute. And we see pastimes when Krishna reveals that. There's even yogic cities and powers by which one can come lighter than the feather. So these are just further points to actually indicate when we hear statements by Prabhupada, it may seem very contrary to our Western understanding, our whole way of thinking about things, and we may be a little hesitant, but actually if we do a little research, we're continually being revealed that actually the statements of Bhagavatam are correct. The words of Srila Prabhupada's self-realized soul are holding true. But the kind of higher dimension of this point is actually explaining that everything is dependent on the will of the Supreme Lord. That even any so-called material laws or movements of planets or any minute activities in this world, Prabhupada explains material scientists want to avoid the rule and government of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore they imagine different conditions under which they suppose the planets move. The only condition, however, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All the various predominating deities of the planets are persons, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also a person. The Supreme Personality orders the subordinate persons, the demigods of various names, to carry out His supreme will. So this is explaining the idea that actually everything, all of the forces going on in this world are simply being conducted by the authority of the Supreme Person. This is actually, if we really understand this, it radically changes the way we see the world, the way we adjust with elements of this world. When we see, when we understand all the planets, all the forces of this world, like wind, earth, water, air, that actually all of these are personalities, and they're simply acting according to the will of the Supreme Lord. This is actually a proper understanding, and this is the fact. So when we actually begin to see the world in that way, it actually removes this tendency for faith in the modern scientific method and allows us to adopt a Krishna conscious perspective. In anything, if we go outside, we're seeing so many different phenomena. So the problem is material science is simply given a name or a technical terminology to the phenomenon that we see that's actually simply the mercy and the work and the artistry of God. So this is a great hindrance actually in our spiritual life. It's explained here that all the living entities are in this fort of material energy. The material energy is known as Durga, and she's protecting all living entities within this fort. So the conditioned souls were bound up in this fort of material energy, and one of the main things is these misconceptions in Kali Yuga, the scientific propaganda to establish everything without reference to God is such a disease that we see the whole world, actually, the whole society is becoming misguided by that mistake, actually. So if we understand more carefully how things are actually related to Krishna, then it frees us from this misconception. This is a nice point that was made by Chitananda Swami. He says, when a scientist does not understand a phenomenon, he simply puts his own name on it, such as, quote, gravity. What is gravity? It is an inconceivable energy that attracts material objects. But what is it? They cannot explain. They hide by applying a new name. Try it. What is crystallization? It is only a name of a phenomenon we cannot understand. Actually, the scientist, utterly baffled at the transformations of the world, tries to bluff the public with a smokescreen of names. Even the most authoritative of theorems will contain terminology like maybe, probably, it might have been, as far as we know. But how far do you know? So this is what we're facing, and subtly, due to our conditioning, we can actually see these are hindrances to our development of faith. We're hearing that the development of faith in Scripture is the primary qualification, primary means for advancing our qualification in bhakti, from Kanishta, Madhyama, ultimately to Uttama, Acarya. It's based on faith. So a lot of these modern scientific theories, unless we're able to shastrically and with the help of the association of advanced devotees actually remove these misconceptions, then we'll remain always baffled with these tinges of doubts when we read Prabhupada's books. So again, the main point actually is not really the specifics, but understanding that everything is simply working under the supreme authority of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And similarly, the body that we have and the body of the presiding deities of the different planetary systems, they're also given by Krishna in this verse. Ishvara sarva bhutanam pradeshe arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani antarudhani maya. So we're within this body and this covering, and this is a result of past fruitive activity, of ignorance of Krishna's position, of the true nature of this material world, how it's simply a transformation of Krishna's energy. The next point I actually mentioned is this cooperation that's required of Prakriti and Purusha. Such adjustments of air are all made possible by the cooperation of the principles of Purusha, male, and Prakriti. By cooperation in material nature and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all affairs of the universe are going on nicely in their proper order. And we hear in Brahma Samhita how all of the planets, they're all simply conducting their orbit based on the will of Krishna. So if we can develop the faith actually and the understanding that everything is going on according to the supreme will of God, this is a great eligibility for advancing in devotion. The problem is that we don't have faith in that. We're thinking, oh, this was a mistake, this wasn't supposed to happen. This is what's testing our faith in Krishna, and our service to Krishna actually gets checked by these type of subtle mentalities and doubts. But understand that actually this verse, Maya Dyakshena Prakriti Siyate Sachta, everything, every single thing, every moment is being controlled by Krishna. Directly. Maya is directly under his control. The material nature is working under his direction. So when if we can try to develop this faith, then in every moment we can live in our relationship with Krishna of service in this subordinate position. The next discussion that's brought up is how there's two types of living entities. The supreme living entity, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the ordinary living entity, the Jiva. So this is the only two categories of living entities, the Supreme Personality and the Jiva. So being Jiva, insignificant, we're always dependent on the mercy of Krishna, on his supreme controllership. And when we try to counteract that or resist that, that's the source of suffering, trying to resist the supreme will of the Lord. And we can take inspiration from the demigods there and the planetary presiding deities who are simply carrying out their activities according to his will. They're not saying, I really want to deviate from my orbit. I've been doing this for so many millions of years. I really want to... No, they're happy to have this service, actually. So this is the mood that I don't need to try to put myself as the controller. Rather, I accept the service of the Lord that he's given me, and that is our happiness. That's our satisfaction. That's what we're hearing in Nectar of Devotion. The happiness of devotion, it's so much greater than any type. It can't even compare to even a fragment of any type of material happiness, even spiritual liberation. Simply pure devotional service, the desire to serve Krishna as he desires, with no personal. So it doesn't matter what we're doing, whatever service we have, whatever engagement we're doing, if we develop this, if we strive for this mentality of pure devotion, then we'll be immediately situated in this, in a huge ocean of transcendental bliss, not dependent on circumstance, not dependent on which service it is, not dependent on any of these things, but just the fact that we have the ability, the privilege to serve the Supreme Lord is the greatest happiness. So similarly, we were discussing a little bit about this fort that the living entities are trapped in by Durga Devi. So this fort is kind of whatever position we find ourselves due to our past misdeeds, actually. This misuse of free will. So we also have to take responsibility for that. Sometimes when there's some difficulty and challenges, then we have the tendency to pray for relief. Please just get me out of this situation so I can serve you better. That's my real motivation, Krishna. I just want to serve you, but right now I can't serve you, so please make an adjustment, then I can serve you. So this subtle desire actually for happiness or liberation, these are also keeping us in bhakti abhas, or not pure devotion, because we're desiring some sort of material comfort. So also the necessity to accept the position that we're in as due to our past misdeeds, and not that I require some change. Lord Chaitanya says, "Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim, kavitam va jagadishakye." That I don't desire anything. I don't desire any adjustment to the situation. I have to simply accept what you've given me. My only desire is for pure devotional service. So accepting our position, whatever good or bad or mediocre situation that we have, not desiring to adjust the externals, but just within that, let the reactions that are coming to me, let them come. Let me not strive to change those, but let me just endeavor for your service. And in that position, we can find that happiness that Lord Chaitanya is encouraging us. So this fort also is, as we mentioned, these atheistic arguments, this material conditioning that we're subject to. This has to be eradicated by careful study and the association of saintly people who are full of faith, actually. They have faith in realization. And misconceptions, remaining on the bodily platform in spite of so much reminders and so much classes and programs, and everything we're doing is really, the first step is to get off the bodily concept of life. And doing this, actually, the living entity, the insignificant jiva, has the possibility to achieve the greatest destination. He can actually transcend this whole, everything that we're reading about, the cosmic manifestation, the revolving of the planets, the sun, all this. Actually, in the perfectional state, we don't have to worry about any of this because we're not in the material world anymore. We ultimately go back to the spiritual world. And there, the soul simply delights in the inconceivable energy of the internal nature of God. And the endless sufferings and misconceptions and doubts and pains, that doesn't exist there. And that's the true position. Now, the living entity, as we're saying, actually, he's always dependent on the Supreme Lord. And if he revives this understanding of his dependence, then he acts accordingly. So today is also the disappearance day of Ishvara Puri. It's the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya, I believe. Yes. So he, I wasn't able to spend much time finding anything, but we know that actually Lord Chaitanya received initiation, and he very jubilantly received the somewhat simple orders of his spiritual master, that actually, my dear Chaitanya, you're not qualified to study the Vedas. Don't study Vedanta. You simply take this mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra, and you chant it, and continue to go on propagating the Sankirtan. Continue chanting and dancing, and in this way spread the Sankirtan movement. So Lord Chaitanya, as the role of the ideal devotee, he simply took this order as his life, and so he took the order very simply, and he did that. And he executed it so perfectly that he came back to Srimad Master and he said, I think I've become crazy by this chanting process. But actually, you've achieved perfection. These symptoms are signs of pure love of God. So, the dependent position means simply accepting the instructions that we're given. We all have our likes and dislikes in the conditioned state based on our raga and dvesha, our attachment and aversion to our material situation, our body, and the modes of nature. But real dependency means accepting any service or instructions that we're giving and just carrying that out in a humble and submissive mood. And as we're hearing from Parameshwar yesterday, that is the key, actually, that we make so much more progress in that approach as opposed to trying to arrange our own desire for, oh no, this is the service that's for me. Please, how can I serve you, but let me serve you in this way. They're a little contradictory. So Lord Chaitanya's teaching is to become the servant of the servant of the servant of the devotees. If we're trying to develop humility, we have to put ourselves under the devotees. We can't be the servant of the servant and command the devotees. Servant of the servant, to develop this position of Chernadapi, more humble than anybody to grasp. We're just at the mercy of the devotee. You just order me. Just order me. Sometimes devotees say that. In the humble state, I say, Prabhu, just order me. That's actually the right mood. And that's how we can develop the humility, which will allow us to take great pleasure, actually, in being dependent on Krishna, being dependent on the instructions of the Vaishnavas and the spiritual master. So, just kind of wrapping up here. In any case, one must accept these laws are made by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So-called scientists have no control over them. The scientists can falsely, improperly declare that there is no God, but this is not a fact. So let us endeavor to disprove the material atheistic notions. The problem with these theories is it's explaining a phenomenon, but it's not connecting it back to Krishna. Therefore, it's simply, as we're hearing, name and forms, gravity. But what the heck is gravity? Why is there this mystical force? But simply by putting a name on it, then you'll go to any 8th grade classroom and they'll say, oh, that's gravity. Yeah, don't you know gravity? It's gravity. So just putting a name, but that doesn't answer, it doesn't explain anything. So we have to move beyond it, because everything in our modern world has this problem of just names. Oh, it's just combustion, or it's just, the crystallization, all these things. We have to expose this fallacy. It's really, in one sense, it's compared to Mayavad philosophy, because it's explaining everything's going on, but there's no cause, there's no purpose, it's just going on. So the whole educational system is completely bewildered by this. We go to the universities, people have no idea. So we first have to develop our faith, as we were talking about, and realization, actually, and then we can, little by little, hope to assist in this movement to spread Krishna consciousness. And in the mood of Lord Chaitanya, to take up the Sankirtan process, Sankirtan movement in all its aspects, and just carry out that instruction. That's our greatest joy and happiness. So, those are a few thoughts on the verse. Thank you all very much for your time. Are there any questions or comments or discussion? Okay, back to John.
Thank you for your class, bro. I like the topic for today's class. It was very similar to a discussion that I've heard when I was speaking with Hirunara Maharaj. We were talking about this, something similar. And he says that the scientists, not only they're struggling to understand how, but because they don't have a conception of why, which makes it really useless, because if they say everything comes from nothing, then what's the point of even trying to discover everything if nothing matters even? But he says if there's a conception of why, which is where it came from God, then actually it makes the scientific process even wonderful, because there's a person behind the act.
Yeah.
And
early scientists actually, back even only a few hundred years back, they were appreciating science as the revelation of the work of God and all these laws of nature. Anyone who has, as Prabhupada would say, little brains, and they study math or science, they can see how remarkable everything is working. I remember studying biology, which is generally, these are a lot of the most atheistic people, but I read the biology book, it was like a Krishna conscious book. I was looking at all the cells, the pictures, it's all working together. It's the glory of God. But I didn't find the word God or Krishna in that book anywhere. So despite overwhelming, evidence of the contrary, intuition that there's something going on here, no, they just put names, respiration, cellular, whatever, take the test, move on. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like to
You're making this point about getting off the bodily conception of life. And oftentimes we're hearing either the negative conception, we're not this body, or the positive conception of what we are, we're spiritual living entities, and we miss the point. At least I can speak for myself and say I missed the point. So how can we actually come to this conception that we're not this body? Or do we act in the conception before realizing the conception? How do we do this?
Well, the first thing, actually, we hear it. We have to hear it. And it's something that we strive to understand, but we don't make external things. Actually, simply by devotion, by properly, this is a key, proper devotion. Proper devotion means no desire for fruitive activity. Not doing devotion for any motivation. That's bhakti. That type of bhakti will give us realization that we're not the body. But as long as we're doing bhakti, we're still holding on to, I want to get this, I need to get that, it's going to keep us in the bodily platform. It's not liberating for the soul. The addition is when you engage in real devotion, then naturally the soul is he's coming out of the material illusion. He's realizing that I don't have anything to do with this material atmosphere because he's not bound by this attachment and aversion. So, simply by striving for proper devotion, understanding carefully what real devotion is, and trying to engage in that with great determination and endeavor. Mamcha yovya bicharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. By engaging in pure devotion, unfailing in all circumstances, one automatically comes to the spiritual platform. So by striving to properly cultivate bhakti, then we'll begin to come out of that conception. So I've also had this question. I've asked this question many times, trying to understand. But it's something that we can think about, we can meditate on, and we can try to apply by trying to get ourselves free from the principles of attachment and aversion. The soul will reveal itself, really, if we engage in bhakti. Those are a few thoughts, but do you want to clarify anything, or is that helpful?
I think that answers my question. I'm understanding perhaps we shouldn't have such a heavy desire to come off the bodily conception, rather be satisfied and have the desire to execute pure devotional service. This should be our main motivation.
That's our main motivation, but at the same time we have to keep hearing again and again, because our conception of that is for millions of lifetimes. That's our main conception. I'm the body. So therefore, if we hear it a few times, we're like, okay, you hear it a few more times, okay. It has to hear over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It has to be like a very constant thing. Then finally, one time it'll sink in. We'll reach a level of purity whereby which we get a little realization of it. So therefore, it's true. We don't emphasize, okay, just try to imagine this or something. But rather, we engage in devotion, but we keep hearing the real tattva, the real philosophy, that actually we're not the body. And that's in the beginning stages, the development of our devotion, in a lot of ways, it depends on our understanding. We have to understand the process of devotion, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, to execute it properly. Thank you. Anything else? Science? Any challenges? You can just imagine if there was a group of students here, how many hands would fly up, perhaps.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
How does one do a devotional service without attachment to the service? Maybe from that propensity, and like reap the real benefits of doing the service, like without turning it into like something on a material level.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to be enthusiastic in our service, but keep in mind that at any time that service can change. And if our attraction is for Krishna, then that's not such a big it's not such a big boulder of an obstacle for us. So develop just always keeping in mind that this service is for the pleasure of Krishna and the devotees. Then it's not about me or what I like, really. It's about, this is the whole thing. We have to change our conception that it's all about me, do, it's all about Krishna. This is really what it comes down to, this nice point that we're hearing about the object and the subject. This change has to take place. Prabhupada calls it the change of heart. That how much I'm thinking about myself all day long. My whole consciousness of being just zapped and absorbed by just meditating on myself. Practically our whole day, every day. It's just thinking about me. But we're so insignificant. We're like a little particle of dust. So why are we so concerned about it? If we focus on Krishna, then a lot of things happen. We immediately feel satisfied. All of the burdens that we've been worrying about ourselves go away. So we think of Krishna, and then we should just engage in service. And then by that service, we get the happiness that we were looking for by trying to find our own happiness. So, and this is another thing that's very deeply rooted. It's really deeply rooted in our psychology. But so we also have to understand our insignificance. Prabhupada says, you're simply insignificant. We're all simply insignificant. So if we develop that type of humility, then we're not so worried about what we're... So all of these things that our mind is meditating on. If we can try to think, we should try to cultivate the thought, what will please Krishna? Just what will please Krishna.
In the beginning stages, should one just like focus more on chanting more if they can't like maintain their consciousness on Krishna like 24/7?
Yeah, that's how we think. That's actually how we think about Krishna, is by chanting. The more we can chant, the better. Especially in the beginning, or in the middle, or in the later stages. Especially in the beginning, because we can't really focus our mind for a few seconds without it going to some nonsense thing. So we take shelter. This is a nice opportunity to take shelter, to realize I can't even do anything without my mind, thinking all sorts of nonsense. So we have to take shelter of the holy name. Let me just call out. That's a nice position of dependence. Otherwise we're thinking, I don't need to chant. I'm okay. But yeah, if we're thinking, I'm about to, Maya's really strong. I don't know what I'm going to do. So just start chanting. That's nice. Yeah, there's many different activities of devotion, these 9 different things. Just engage in those and we're okay. But if we're doing something and it's not in that list of 9, then we're in trouble. Hearing, chanting, remembering, serving. Really, that's what Prabhupada says. He says, one should therefore be very careful to make sure one's properly engaged. Anything outside of these devotional activities is not devotional service. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all very much. I didn't have so much to say, but by the mercy of all the devotees, maybe a nice few points were brought out. So, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagvatam ki, Nithai Gaura Premanande.